There you go, Alan.
All right, Jim.
We are live.
We've
2024.
been wanting to do this type of review for a while.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't able to do it in 2022 nor in 2023, so we decided to do it now.
That's right, Alan. This is the ranking the best metal rock books from 2022 to 2023 in 2024.
And you're
Figure that one
calling
out.
them the best. I'm calling them stuff we read that we enjoyed.
Ranking them.
Okay.
Well, I mean, the reason why we were lumping them all together is because in 2022 there were books being, put out, and a lot of people were doing a lot of reading during COVID, right? The lockdowns and all that stuff, and we just didn't get a chance to get around to all these books. So
Well, you
we're
got to
just kind of
put
grouping.
the end of 2022, right? We're not talking January because there's a whole other set of books we could have spoken about then.
These are the ones we're talking about that were released in that time frame that
Say
we
late
thought that stood
2022.
out. All right, that we thought stood out. How's that? Ranking them. All right, let's get going, folks. Hello to Jim. Hello to Michael. All right, let us go. Alan, you're gonna give us the
Yeah,
first one here. Hold on.
I was
Coming in number 6. It's, by the way, it's out of 6. Boom.
Into the Void, Mr. Geezer Butler.
Show it again. There it is.
So, read Aussies right there, right over here. And then I read Tony Iommi's.
Mm-hmm.
And now I got to read Geezer's. This is like the Kiss. This is like Kiss almost, right? You got Gene, and then and now we're just waiting for Bill Ward's, I guess. But poor Geezer, third place at the dinner table, nothing left, no food, not even dessert. There's maybe a glass of wine left for him. I was looking forward to this because Geezer seemed like, probably one of the more level-headed guys in the group, right? And, Ozzy's, the one behind me here, had me pissing my pants throughout. I mean, the car horn factory. I mean, I was literally crying out laughter where people were coming to check on me to see if I was okay. And then you had Tony Iommi's was just whatever his recollections were, because he had a little bit, maybe had a cold writing that book or something, but there were nice short little stories, equally as funny, and his perspective. But now, as Geezer says in his book, his editor told him that some of this stuff is not PC correct anymore, which led him with either repeating stories that we heard 30 or 40 times, or, keeping out the juicy bits. There's no juicy bits, Jim.
Have the juicy bits all been said? That's the thing. Like, between Ozzy and Tony, is there any untold stories? That's what I'm getting at.
But apparently not, because we got sometimes you like to get that third version because it's a different recollection of what happened. And he didn't park his Cadillac in the pool. It fell in on its own. I was there.
Well, what I got out of the whole thing was a lot of that I know before, because like you, I read Ozzy's book, I read Tony's book. Actually, I read 2 of Ozzy's books, right? Because he had 2. The kinship, like, it was more of a kinship from his perspective. Ozzy spoke about less about the kinship. Iommi was more of the leader, but Geezer was more of like the quarterback in a sense, right? Well, I wouldn't say the quarterback. Maybe he was like the manager, or a manager of the team. I don't know. Like, he just played a different role, and I liked that it was a brotherhood. Like you read the book, and the band felt like a brotherhood, and I think he gave Ozzy more credit for being a singer and a songwriter than Tony did.
Yes, more than even Ozzy did.
Yeah, more than Ozzy did.
Yeah,
So,
I think he was. When it came to that, that's a good point. But I mean, there's no meat left on the bone for poor Geezer to get his book.
yeah,
But even Tony was able at least to talk about the Martin Tony, what is it, Tony Martin era?
yeah.
Which the good news, Jim, did you hear? They're releasing it.
Yes, they
Maybe
were
May
releasing that.
2024,
That's right.
the
Didn't
Tony
they say that?
Martin era.
Didn't they say that last year though? That's
Yeah,
what.
well, we'll keep our fingers crossed. But that's it. I mean, it was a highly anticipated book for myself. I couldn't wait to read it. And it just left me saying, I'm sure Geezer, I'm sure there's tons, a whole other book on the editing room floor. I have no doubt about that. And I'm sure that's the book I would have preferred to have read, maybe even Geezer himself. So,
I mean, there was the devil horns, like, no, it was me. It was me. It was before Ronnie James Dio. But then again, he pointed out the Beatles, right? And how they use the devil horns. Dio made it popular. He didn't invent it. He just made it popular to the masses in the metal world, right? Geezer, I'm sure he did it beforehand, and I'm sure the Beatles and John Lennon and the rest of them did the devil horns. But yes, it was popularized by Ronnie James Dio. A lot of nice things to say about Dio, but he did point out the sort of the butting of heads with Dio that you didn't get that as much with Tony. Like if you recall in the book, he was saying how he was difficult to work with, that maybe Ronnie came across as everybody was sort of siding with him, but no, there was reason why he had a sort of, the live evil problems, in the mix, and they're not just getting along. They're in one. The Americans are in one limo, and the British are in another limo, and the separation. But he did point out that Ronnie was difficult to work with because he was more of a let's do this now, where the Sabbath guys were like, okay, we'll take our time. When we get there, when we get there. But it doesn't mean either side is wrong. It just means either side have a different sort of ethics, work ethic. That's all.
no, and again, in all their books, I mean, I think they were very happy to get better back together years and years later, decades later, to form Heaven and Hell and do that tour. And they were
Yes.
hoping to do even more and build on that. Fortunately, it never came to pass, but it was interesting. I mean, a lot of the stuff I've read before, heard before, and I can't say the perspective was anything different than what we were led to believe in the past. But again, I'm sure there's a whole other book on the cutting room floor that the poor geezers may be suffering for the times that it was released, and the juicy bits weren't no longer publishable. Whereas in Ozzy and Tony's case, I mean, they didn't leave too much for the imagination. So.
I agree with you. I don't think it was a terrible read. It was a fun read to remember, the Sabbath era from Geezer Butler's perspective, a little bit more about his family and his growing up, and being Irish, right, in the band. But I kind of enjoyed it. But I agree with you 100% that we should have learned something new, right? There should have been something else there. And I think a true definition of a great documentary and a great book is when you lay it out all on the line, right? The tragedy, the triumphs, and it's all there for people to read about. Because that's what makes, that's a connection, the human connection, right? When people can relate to tragedy and triumph. Saying that,
Yeah.
any other last points?
No, I mean, him being the lyricist of the band, you would think, he does go into a few of the songs that he's written, and but he's such a great lyricist. You would figure that there would be a little bit more to the book, and to maybe insights into the. At least he didn't go down that path analyzing every song. He did a few, but from my recollection, it's been a while since I read it. But again, he's got one of the strongest lyricists I think ever.
His lyrics in a way defined heavy metal, right? The way lyrics are written, right?
So I can't say that was a bad read, but I mean, I've been waiting so long, and this is Geezer Butler is there from the beginning, and all the stories. I mean, the guys have been around forever, right? So just left me a little short. Let's say that.
Yeah. I guess it's all about expectations. You were expecting here, but you got that, right? So there's a gap. All right, moving on. This is our fifth most appreciated book for the year, the fifth one that we liked. I don't know, am I ranking it properly? Let's see, Geezer Butler. Sean Kelly. Don't call it hair metal.
Don't call it hair metal. Great interview with Sean. We were able to get him on around the time of the book launch, and I love the book. I mean, the way he did it, the way he went through it historically, and the insights and interviewing and having friends that remembered that period. And again, it's to clarify, because again, I was watching, I won't say the name of the channel that was doing music video. They have a show called Hair Metal Madness. And Ted Nugent was on there,
The
you
Nuge.
know, doing Wango Tango or a Scream Dream. I mean, the bands that they're putting there under the hair metal banner is complete, you know, sabotage. I'm not sure they were hair metal, you know.
Yeah.
You know, the Oingo Boingos or Danger Danger. Okay, there's an argument to be made, and but some of the bands, I can't. Motorhead, I think, was there under hair metal. Like, so that's why his book's about, hey, don't call it hair metal, because you know, even the stuff that was considered hair metal in his book, he says it's not really hair metal. It's kind of rock based, blues based, and that was his argument, his thesis, and I think he presents it well, because I think people have lost track of what exactly was. No, again, you know, like he says, it's a term that came decades later, maybe.
Yes.
But you know, there's bands that we can
That's a
look
good
back and
point.
say, yeah, you know, that was probably hair metal, where the look was more important than the music, but the music was still good. And
Yeah.
that's what his point was in the book. We can't just lump them under this joke called hair metal. There's a lot of good bands, a lot of good music, and still being played and still being toured about today. So
I gotta say that Sean Kelly's book, who also is the guitarist for Coney Hatch and Lee Aaron, he at first I was going, oh, here goes another hair metal book. You know, we're gonna hear the same old stories. But I think the way he sort of wrote it, it's like a thesis. He's trying to prove the point, right? And the way he wrote it, and the way it's sort of like it's a historical sort of documentation as it leads up to from that the beginning of the golden era to through the golden era to later on. He just the way he words it, the way he puts it, the way he puts it together, the way he chronologically sets it up, it works. It's a fun read, and you know what? Oh yeah, and oh yeah, a lot of yeah, he's right, and oh yeah, I didn't think of that. So he does a really great job on his thesis.
and again, I just finished reading Nothing But a Good Time, another book I would recommend that came out a few years ago. But great interviews with Tracy Guns and a lot of people from that era. And so it was just a nice fit to read Sean's book after this, because you know the same era. We're talking about the same stories, the same. Some even people were interviewed in both books. So yeah, it's just it was a nice tie into that other book that I highly recommend that you haven't read yet. I lent it to you, but
Yeah,
again
sitting on the shelf.
I would suggest you read it because you'll have a good time reading it. So
All right, cool. All right. So now we're going into here is the next one. Okay, got it. Oh, gotcha. All right, number 4, Brian Johnson, The Lives of Brian. Now, I was really looking forward to this one. This one was the one I was really looking forward to.
me too.
Finally, Brian Johnson's gonna lay it on the line. The tragedy, the triumph, the hear loss. Axl Rose taking over for him. What does he think about this? And I gotta say, I was kind of let down. I did learn about his life and you know how he grew up in London, or not in London. Where do you grow up again? In
Near Newcastle.
Newcastle. That's right. But it's nice to learn about. You know what it is, Alan. It's great to know about people's backgrounds. I have nothing against that. I like having a little, you know, where you come from. But when it becomes the whole book, or it feels like it's the whole book, that's when it gets a little too much.
Or something. It starts with my grandfather, and it's like, oh, that's I hope it's not one of those books. My great grandfather, but you know, I know you were disappointed by this book because it pretty much ends the moment he finishes recording Back in Black. So the good news is, Jim, there's supposed to be a second book that carries on from there. So I knew going in that this was kind of a little bit working its way up. I was, you know, I thought expecting a little bit more of the AC/DC years, but I can't say I was disappointed. First of all, Brian Johnson, I read his Rockers and Rollers. He had me laughing out loud. 14 pages in, I was laughing out loud in this one. You know, you could see the struggle that this guy had, not only with Geordie and how he got ripped off by the music business, like everybody, but how he made this unbelievable and really destiny to join, you know, get this call to come and rehearse for his band. that I cannot say the band's name, but the initials are AC/DC.
Akadaka.
So no, again, but he's just a character. The way you're reading it, it's like you're sitting at the bar having a Newcastle Brown Ale with him, and just hearing these stories. So I loved it. I loved it. I know you were disappointed with it, but I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. And again, I can't wait to hear the second part there about the ACDC here. So.
Tanvir's texting and he says, Jimmy doesn't appreciate foreplay. He just wants the meat. Or the meal. The meat.
I'll let somebody else confirm or deny that. It won't be me.
Alan, I did read it. I did enjoy it, but I guess I was disappointed in a sense.
I know you were disappointed.
The same way you were disappointed with Geezer Butler in a sense. Like, and maybe this is a little bit different. I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it, but I love the part of he was a struggling musician, trying to make it, the Geordie years, his parents. It just got a little too much in, the world of his parents. I didn't know he was half Italian. I had no idea, but he was. His mother was Italian, right, from Italy. I don't remember if he said he speaks Italian, but he probably understands Italian. So that was interesting. They were poor. They were poor people, right? I mean, there's no spoilers here because this book's been out for like about a year and a half now. Yeah. So if you haven't read it by now, you should be watching the show. I love the fact that he was, like you mentioned, he was picked for AC. This is like freaking AC/DC we're talking about. And he just, everything he's got into it, right? And of course, in the next book, we'll realize when you give everything you got, what happens. I love the part about the Axl Rose. It's kind of like he didn't want to pay attention to it because in a way it burned him inside. I think that's what he mentioned.
Yeah, it's like somebody else dancing with your girlfriend, so sleeping.
So he didn't want to pay attention to it, and it was happening. But that's what I love about AC/DC. They're true to their friendship. They're really true to their friendship, and a lot of people said, "Yeah, get Axl." But I just knew if he sorted out his problems, they would have taken him back, and I guess they did.
Well, the way he describes how it came about, I mean, that was unbelievable. I don't want to do any spoiler alerts, but he explains how he got to that point. And it's amazing that he was able to do what he did for so long, and luckily they put an end to it to preserve what he has hearing left and enable him to live somewhat of a normal life. So.
Imagine being a singer and you can't hear, right? That's just, it must be just that alone is depressing. And then somebody stepping in on your shoes.
Well, yeah, that would be hard.
It hurts. And
most bands look at Aerosmith just canceled because of Steven Tyler. They didn't think about bringing somebody else in. It's a bit of a slap in the face. It really is. But at the other hand, it's like, okay, we got X amount of shows to do. We don't want to disappoint our fans. This might be our last tour ever. Yeah. And we just, punch out the clock and do these last shows with somebody else. I mean, he's Axl's not exactly Joe Blow off the street. I mean,
Yeah.
And I just read a Chris Slade article that said that with Axl, he was listening to them in the monitors on that tour. He said it was the best AC/DC ever sounded, which might explain why Chris Slade wasn't invited back for power pop, power build, power up.
Yeah.
Or the recent tour. So,
listen, I will tell everybody that if you want to get that foreplay, then this is the book for you. I'm really excited about the next Brian Johnson book, The Meal. That to me is where, they're doing the albums that made them so big. Not that they didn't touch on that. He did touch on it. It's just he didn't go into depth about it. It's like I'm reading a book about 30 pages left and now he's joined the band. It's like, okay, I mean, what the hell are they going to talk about in 30 pages? A little less about, growing up poor and a little more about AC/DC.
But then he hesitates, right? Like, I really want to go, I got something good. I might have a little bit of a resurgence. I get my business. But again, everything works out for the best because that roofing business he had, that was finished within the next 3 years. I mean, nobody was doing that. it didn't exist anywhere. It's like it went the way of the typewriter and the Betamax machines, and just everything. I mean, it was just when it was meant to be. It's meant to be. It's destiny.
Yep, yep. You know what? Again, maybe it was expectations. On my part, like Geezer Butler was expectations on your part. I was expecting this, but I got that. But it was still an enjoyable read. I'm not gonna say it was horrible. I didn't like it. I did like it. I learned a lot about Brian Johnson on a personal level that I would have not known if I didn't read the book.
Here, the next book is also we're split.
Yes,
we're split on.
We're split on. Let's see what we got. Brian Johnson. And the next book is Rick Emmett, Lay It on the Line. There it is.
We were lucky enough to interview Rick upon the release. I'll let you go first since you read it first.
Well, this is an interesting book too. What happens is we've interviewed Gil, Mike Levine, Rick Emmett. So the stories have been told to us already. So it's not like we're reading a book and discovering something new. You know, the ups and downs, Rick has already expressed most of that stuff to us. So we had a head start. That's what I'm getting at. There was no real big secrets revealed. This book is a part being in Triumph, part being Rick Emmett, and part sitting on a psychiatrist's chair and just trying to understand the world and the music business and just everything in life. So there's part philosophy, part Triumph, part Rick. It was a good read. I enjoyed it. He's a different person that we know who's on the record. Like, you know, the lay it on the line, the positive messages of always continuing. Like, you expect a different person from the person in the book. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a different part of him that we hear on music and a different part of him that we hear in the book. His disappointments in Triumph, his triumphs in Triumph. There's some cool moments. Like, he is giving us an inside look at the music business, right? An inside look at being the third guy getting voted out, 2 against 1 in Triumph. But that was the magic of Triumph. The headbutting. Anyways, what'd you think?
Well, I mean, I didn't get too much of that. I mean, we joked earlier when the book starts, my grandfather came to America and, you might be in for a long read. But Rick's book is completely different than anything I've ever read before. I mean, like you said, yes, it's his life growing up. It gives you about his attitude. He's an overachiever. He's a go-getter. He's an athlete. Then he joins Triumph, which has already got this record contract, and they take it to this other level. But that's only like Rick's always said. That's just been a part of his life, a small part of his life that he's known by. But it doesn't make him everything. Is about Triumph for him. It's not his be all end all. So that's where it gets into the other parts, and even his solo albums. The early ones with Duke Street Records, he doesn't go into too much about that. He goes a little bit, but it's more or less overall. Then he goes into, how to make the music and how the ear hears things. And now you say, whoa, man, this is territory that's never been done before in an autobiography, a rock autobiography. And that's what I thoroughly enjoyed about the book. It's not the, here's the album, here's this song, I did this song, then this album, and then we did this, Tony Iommi did a little bit of that in his, not that it was bad, it was well done. But, you're like, okay, what's happening behind the scenes? And Rick takes you, like I said, behind the mask, because was always wearing a mask. So now he's learning to live without that mask. And then he goes into the family life and how it's difficult. But it's really, when you're getting into, like I joked at the time.
Alan, you got to pause right there. Right, the new Metal Voice CEO.
We got a new Metal Voice member.
CEO is coming. CEO. I think we might get fired. We might get fired here,
Alan. the president of Metal Voice Incorporated.
Where is he?
Has decided to join us.
You bring him here. Well, turn the video off. No, just bring him here. Bring him here. A quick little Alan. I'm really fearing here. I'm fearing for my life. Okay, bring him. All right, here we go. Alan?
Oh, the Metal Voice. There you go. The CEO himself.
The CEO himself.
He's the one that signs the checks.
He's got his little shirt on, Alan.
Yeah.
I don't know if he cries, that means
I don't
I'm
know if
fired
you're like
or you're fired.
Is he gonna lay it on the line? What did you think of the Rick Emmett book?
Hold on. He likes it.
He likes it.
No poop.
Okay, good. We got the CEO.
He signs all the checks, Alan.
He's the one
with
that
crayons.
makes sure that's the professional studios and the professional microphones, that we got enough money and equipment to pay for that stuff. So again, thanks, boss. You're doing a great job. Thanks for signing the checks.
I think he's had enough, Alan.
Yeah, he doesn't like to be on camera, the big boss.
There you go.
He's more of a behind the scenes guy.
That's it. You know what?
We're handing him off.
I'm just handing him off to the crew.
To
the limo is here to take him away.
The merch lady.
The merch lady.
But again, that's it. When you're getting into physicalities and how to play guitar and how the ear processes music, and I mean, Rick takes it to a whole other level, and that's what I really enjoyed about the book. I know you were looking more for you had mentioned at the time more stories about Triumph and in depth on Triumph, but it's really a small part of the book when you look at the whole. So.
But I did like it, and that's kind of why I rated it higher, like you did. I liked it because it did talk about the dynamics a lot. The dynamics of when you're 3, right? That's the perfect. What do they say? The perfect democracy.
Yeah, and again, it's Rick's point of view, and he had an honest impression of that period. It wasn't a lot of easier period for anybody at one point. Especially when you owe your record company millions and millions of dollars, and you got to recoup that somehow.
That's what I liked about it, Alan. That's the tragedy, like the pressure of knowing that you owe all this money to an entity, and they're expecting a return. You could see that it didn't sit well with him, knowing that he owes people money, and he had to create something to pay them back or to do something. He didn't like to be owned, whereas the other guys, to them it was just a loan, right? We'll take that money, we'll turn it around. But Rick, his character, he's more of a, I don't know what more of a cautious kind of person. Versus, yeah.
Pragmatic.
So, pragmatic is a good word. Yeah. And I get it.
A good read, a very good read. Highly recommended. And again, if you just want to hear the story of Triumph, this is, like you said, you wanted the Brian Johnson book to be the story of AC/DC. Well, if you think this book about Rick Emmett is just about the Triumph years, you'll be sorely disappointed. But you'll be glad you read it, because it's not just based on that. So
it gives you, and I'll leave everybody with this, it gives you what it's really like to be in a successful band, but the grind of it all, right? The grind. In other words, the touring, the plane rides, the pressures from the label, the pressures to crank songs out, the pressures to sell the seats, all these sort of inner workings and all the pressures and the ups and downs and the tragedy and the triumphs. That's what makes a good book, right? Revealing it all.
I sat down once and gave a kind of a rating, a Martin Popoff rating to all the favorite bands and everything I've purchased and stuff. Triumph easily made my top 10 bands of all time, but Rick always considered himself, we never were the A grade bands like the AC/DC of the world. We were more of a B, C plus type of band, which I was surprised to hear, because growing up, Triumph was, they never opened for anybody. They were huge, right?
Yeah.
But he was very honest with where they fit into the music scene. They weren't the Madonnas and the Metallicas and the Aerosmiths or AC/DCs of the world. But they fit in good with the Scorpions and the Priest at the time. And
what a guitarist! You know what? To me, Triumph. You know what? Apart, they're great, but together, they're just it's the perfection, right? When they're all together doing their thing, they need each other to be Triumph and that music that we love. And a lot of people. And I know Rick, he loves the solo work, and I understand that he wants to express himself. But when he's with Gil and Mike, that's where the magic is. That's just the magic, man. You can't take that away. The magic is there, you know. All
But
right.
again, we're talking about the book, so.
Talking about the book. All right. Here we go. Last book. Last one. No, second to last one. Number 2, Tone Chaser by Steve Rosen, who we did an interview with.
Rosen,
This
yeah.
is Rosen. I don't know, it was like 5,000 pages, Alan. I don't remember.
Oh, what a book. What a book. From a guy that was there.
Understanding Eddie Van Halen, what is that, 20, I can't read it, 20-something year journey with Eddie Van Halen, Edward Van Halen. What a book.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want me to start off and just give everybody the premise, here's a journalist. There's so many levels to this book. Here's a journalist who met Eddie back in the whiskey days. A lot of one-on-ones, a lot of I wouldn't call it sleepovers, but a lot of staying up late at night, just talking with Eddie. And Eddie being so excited to play him the first demos when they're recording the debut album, and sharing his inner band workings and who he was personally. And Steve Rosen was promised by Eddie, don't worry, I'll let you release this book. You could record these conversations. But he never let him. He never let him release this book until, of course, he passes. And then Steve is saying, you know what? I'm going to release this book, right? I mean, he owes it to me. He owes it to me for 1,000 pages and countless interviews. If you want to truly understand who Eddie Van Halen was, then I suggest you pick up this book.
I agree, Jim. I mean, all the insight, all the behind the scenes from a guy that was there. Steve Rosen's done a lot of other things as well. It's not just this one book. Yes. He was a reporter. He did music. He was back there. He was meeting with Eddie. Eddie would come over his house. So it's really and he even he doesn't go too much into like the dynamics with the other guys in the band. He touches upon, but he doesn't really trash anybody else. It's just his observations. It's been a while since I read it, but man, the detail and like we said at the time when we interviewed him, it's like, the poor bastard, can you get this signed off on it? Because he's tried everything he could. Again, you don't want to be too pushy, but all the work he wanted to put into it, he wanted it to be released. So he's kind of hounding Eddie, and then he got kind of turned away because he was hounding him so much, but he was just doing, like you said, what was promised him all along. I mean, people put time and effort into this. It's that the rug pulled out from under him. So, again, just a fantastic read. Really, like, you're talking about stories that you never heard of before.
Yes.
This is firsthand accounts of stuff that nobody else even knew about.
Messages on the answering machine.
Yeah.
Eddie, and he goes, Eddie, I'm recording now. Eddie, I'm recording now. Eddie, I'm recording now. I mean, these are personal. And let's just be honest. There was no trashing of people here, like you said. There's no trashing. It's just conversations with him and Eddie late night, just talking about everything and how that relationship sort of decayed. And he had no idea why the relationship was decaying. But there's another level to this, Alan. Us being the superstar journalists that we are, there's journalism, and then there's bands, and then there's perception about what that relationship really is, right? Here's the journalist thinking that we're friends now. He's friends with Eddie Van Halen. He thought he was friends with Eddie, but I don't think it was reciprocal. I think Eddie just saw him as a journalist. And I think that broke Steve's heart in a way, like as the book's progressing, right? Of course, the artist is going to be very kind to the journalist because they want to make sure they're being looked upon in a positive light. But at the same time, the journalist, as he's seeing this star rise, he's thinking, "Oh my God, I've developed this real friendship." And maybe there was a friendship between him and Eddie Van Halen. There probably was, but the more popular Eddie Van Halen got, sort of that relationship decayed, we could say.
Well, there were some dark years there, right? I mean, towards the before reuniting with David at the end, I mean, there's some dark years, and Steve was there witnessing some of that, or he was, maybe Eddie wasn't communicating with anybody at that point. So
That's right. That's right.
so I think that definitely plays into it as well. So, but a
I
great
really
read. I mean,
a
again,
great read. A great,
what a
fantastic.
surprise. I
Go get it.
mean,
Yeah.
firsthand accounts of stuff and stories you never heard before, and from a person that again was there on site dealing with Eddie, person to person, friend to friend. Like you said, that line kind of got blurred, and then once it got blurred, you couldn't, you were just considered a journalist at the end, and you were lumped in with everybody else through Eddie's management or PR people.
Yes.
So
Good way
you
to
can't
put
help
it.
the feel for Steve at that time, and after all he'd been through trying to bring this book to fruition and bring it to light, I'm glad he was able to do it at the end of the day, hopefully without too much legal repercussions.
You know what? You can go check out our interview, right, that we did with Steve. You can check out the interview with Rick Emmett. You could check out the interview with not Brian Johnson, that's for sure, and Sean Kelly that we did, and we talk about their books more in depth. And if you want to get a better idea of what these books about before you buy them, they are there. Let's go to
Now
number
we
one.
got the number one unanimous choice.
Unanimous.
Unanimous.
My Effin Life, Geddy Lee.
Pardon?
My Effin Life, Geddy Lee. There it is. There's the book. The brilliant.
Wow.
There it is. There's the base. There it is again. There it is again.
What a book. And not only a book, but the whole tour, the book tour, the way it was done. Every city is special theaters with a special guest interviewer. We had Jay Baruchel here in Montreal, a Montrealer Rush fan that was there on the Time Machine tour, or is it Clockwork Angels? Sorry, Clockwork Angels did the little parody, the little funny film, and but Paul Rudd did it in other places from I Love Your Man, and there was just the way it was done, and the book itself is unbelievable. Just you would not expect less from Geddy Lee, a man of quality. Always.
You nailed it. You nailed it. You couldn't expect less. We all know the Rush stories, right? Oh, Caress of Steel down the Tubes tour, Hemispheres, he sang it in the wrong key. We all know the basic stories, but Geddy was really getting, enough detail about the Rush years, the smoking pot. Like, what? You smoked that much? I didn't know that much, right? That was the relationship between him and Neil and Alex, the relationship between him and his wife, right? And sort of how frail it became at the more success, because he was a perfectionist, and perfectionists need to complete their perfection, their jobs, their art, and how that kind of went apart and then how it came back together again. And most importantly, Alan, being a Canadian, a lot of Canadianisms about growing up, right? Being in a minority with a minority group within Canada as well. He's Jewish, so he was living in that Jewish life. But you don't have to be Jewish to appreciate that. You can be, Italian, Greek, whatever nationality. You could be a minority within a minority, and you could appreciate the sort of nuances and the day-to-day cultural differences. But even though he's about 15 years older than us, maybe even 10 or 15, around there, we still grew up the same way as he did in Canada. So there's a lot of those cultural, things that we think of when we grew up in Canada, or maybe even the United States as well, right?
And again, the famous chapter 3, when he goes into his history with his parents and the Holocaust. I mean, that's something that just interesting to read from a historical context. But then he brings it up to put his own situation and his personality into it, how it affected him, throughout the rest of his life. And so again, that was a difficult to read, but it was a necessary read. And again, the whole, yes, he goes album for album and some songs, but it's just the way it's done. Like you said, he's so humble. And he admits, I'm a perfectionist. I used to drive the engineer. What does this knob do? What does this do? How come we can't do this? And then their desperation to record everything so as it could be presented live, right? No overdubs or anything. Whatever they can do, it has to be able to be done live. And I mean, that leads to a whole other bunch of headaches, right? So again, just a wonderful band, a wonderful man, and I can't say enough about this book. It's what we all like about Geddy, and it's he's I mean, everything he talks about. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, okay. Oh yeah, Coke in the early '80s. Wow, yeah, Geddy was part of that too. Okay, okay. But it's like you just accepted the way it's presented to you. You're like just along for the ride, man.
You know, it's all about relationships. This book, his relationship with his wife and his band members, and the love around his family and his family growing up. And I don't know, it's a brotherhood. Rush was a brotherhood, right? And Neil and Alex, they're brothers. And to read the last chapter when Neil passes, it was done right. It wasn't overdone. It wasn't too much in detail, but it was done perfectly. It respectfully. How's that? And he takes a shot. He takes a shot at an artist who is unnamed, who sort of took. He claims who took the opportunity to sort of talk about Neil and his later years before his death, before asking sort of permission from others in the Rush family. And he doesn't name that person, but he goes, I will remember this name. I'll remember what you did. So he takes a shot at somebody, but he does it in a very respectful manner. Like, I know what you did, and I will remember what you did. And that's it.
But just just funny stories.
I was waiting for this book my whole life.
Yeah, I mean, I was able to read his big book of bass, right? Which, man, you gotta be a bass lover. He goes really in detail when it comes to a lot of those bass guitars. But I mean, this is talking about his life, and I mean, just stuff as humble as meeting Robert Plant by chance at a hotel, and they looked at each other, and then Robert came to introduce himself and say, "It can't be him. Well, what would he be doing here?" And sure enough, it was Robert Plant. And just the way that kind of grew into, one of his major heroes, where he was being invited to shows in Toronto to go and see him. Humbly, just the humility of the fellow and the honesty is the book for me. That's the honesty. I mean, he admits when he might have been in an error or how he reacted, even to the fact that they weren't touring anymore. He was honest that he was upset.
Yeah,
then he felt guilty because
it comes down to honesty, Alan. It comes down to honesty. He was honest. That's what compelled us to keep reading this. And he touched the reader on every level, like a family level or a relationship of a wife and husband level. When he talks about his wife and how much he hurt her, and how it was growing apart, but now they're back together, which is great, and they didn't divorce or anything, but their relationship went through troubled times, we'll say, right?
No, it's just the life of a musician, right?
Yeah,
back then.
And it gives you a great perspective of being in the inner circle of being in a popular band. Like Rush is like a friggin' big band. You're talking about the level of, Led Zeppelin in a way, right? This is like, one of the greatest rock bands ever, at least in my opinion. And they will be loved for generations.
And again, you were able to catch him on the book tour.
Alan, two.
Yeah.
I saw him on the first one.
The way he describes the story, and either, we talk about humility. We also talk about comedic aspect, right? I mean,
they've always been a funny bunch of guys, right?
Yeah.
Always, right? And I got to say about the book tour, I saw him the first time and I saw him the second time. The first time it was more of okay, he's talking about the bass. It's not very interesting, but it's Geddy Lee. And we got to meet him and shake his hand, or not shake his hand, but get his book signed and take a picture. So that was cool. But the second time was a lot better because, again, like you mentioned, guest interviewers with Geddy, and that made it more lively and fun. I don't think there was a person in that room was bored. We were all engaged in the interview because Geddy, he's funny. He's clever. We always think as the brains behind Rush was Neil, but Geddy was just as clever. And even Alex, as goofy as he is, they're all like pretty smart guys and humble. I like that word, humble. Very humble. That's what connects.
So there you go. For us, that was the book of the year, 2023, by far.
Show it again, Alan. Show it again. Ta-da.
If
Da-da,
you haven't read it, run out,
da-da,
grab a
da-da,
copy
da-da,
today.
da-da, da-da. Get your copy today. Geddy Lee, My Effin' Life.
Lots of pictures, lots of little stories. Just a great read from a great musician and Canadian and singer and human being.
Oh, wait a second. The CEO,
Oh,
he approves. He
he
approves of our
approves.
number
He
one
got the
pick.
stamp of approval. All
All right,
righty.
everybody. All right. Thanks for watching, everyone. And, have yourself a wonderful 2024.
Happy New Year.